Okay, so I first of all welcome everyone, both on screen and live. I will take this chance to encourage anyone who can come and learn live, please do so. A considerable part of the beauty of the chaburah is lost when we're not able to learn together as a group. So please, if anyone is able to come live, please do that. I wanted today to work through the Chavruta of the Gemara, or begin working through the Chavruta of the Gemara, and I'm sure we'll carry on Sunday and possibly even next Tuesday in working through this. Basically, the shit of Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef says that the time of Rav Chisda is because of Mevatel MeHechano. We spent a few shiurim discussing conceptually what Mevatel MeHechano means, but there's a whole half an omud in which the Gemara analyzes this view of Rav Yosef, basically from 5 lines down, Rav Yosef Amar, through to the last narrow line, which is Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, which is the next pshat in the Gemara. That's our topic for these shiurim. Just working through the Chavruta Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos. And as I said in the group, I didn't put any more source sheets. I didn't put any more Maram Komis, because the truth is just learning through Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos is pretty tough in its own right. So either way, Rav Yosef says that the reason for this view of Rav Chisda, who makes a chiluk between whether you put the Keli on top of the Muktza item or underneath the Muktza item, as per the Mishnah, is that when you put it underneath the item, it's Mevatel MeHechano. When you put it on top of the item, it's not Mevatel MeHechano, and therefore that's why it's allowed. That's the summary of Rav Yosef's view. Now, on what is the concept of Mevatel MeHechano, we spoke about it at length. For our purposes, I'll simply remind you of 2 Rashis, both of which say that Mevatel MeHechano is built upon something more fundamental, which is that the Keli, upon which the Muktza item sits, whether the Muktza item is the egg or spark or something else, it becomes Muktza itself. That's the, I'm just going to mute everyone because I'm getting a bit of interference, sorry. The item on which the Muktza sits itself becomes Muktza. That's Rashi by us. Muktza itself through the mechanism of a bosses. Now, you could have learned otherwise. Oh goodness, I see my internet connection is unstable. Are people managing to hear me, or do you have problems? Wishy-washy.
We had a couple of minutes pause.
And I can hear you now.
Oh goodness, this is so frustrating. Let me try and sort this out. I apologize. Okay, well, we'll just have to go with it, and I'll record it also if there's problems. So just to summarize what I said so far, apologies for that. Rashi says that where did you lose me? Sorry, gentlemen, where did you lose me?
You're just starting to say that Rashi was talking about that it was the spot became Muktza.
Okay, yeah. So Rashi explains that the concept of Mevatel MeHechano is predicated, is built on an assumption which comes beforehand, which is that the utensil which receives the egg or the sparks or the dirty water, whatever it may be, itself becomes Muktza. Rashi by us on our sugya at the top of the Omud says Mevatel MeHechano, and Rashi explains it. Sorry, Rashi explains it that Mevatel MeHechano So Rashi says that the issue of Mevatel MeHechano is because the receptacle becomes Muktza. And Rashi on Mem Zayin on Beis says Mevatel MeHechano, that's a nasa bossis. So the mechanism is that the receptacle becomes a bossis, and therefore itself it becomes Muktza, and therefore that's called Mevatel MeHechano. Now, in theory, you could have learned that there would be Mevatel Kli MeHechano even without bosses, even if the receptacle doesn't become Muktza itself, but you can't move the receptacle because if you move the receptacle, then the object inside it is also moved, and therefore you'll be moving the Muktza. And that's why you can't move the receptacle. Rashi doesn't learn like that. Rashi says the problem is that the Keli itself becomes Muktza, not that the Keli can't be moved because there's an extraneous factor, which is that Muktza is sitting in it. That such is the view of Rashi. And I remind you of that because we're going to revisit this again and again. In brief, there are two ways you could learn the Gemara. Way number one is Mevatel Kli MeHechano, because the Kli becomes Muktza, which is what Rashi says. How does it become Muktza? Because of bosses. Method number two is nothing to do with the Keli becoming Muktza. The problem is that Lamaisa, you can't move the Keli because there's Muktza sitting inside it, even if the utensil doesn't become bosses. Now,
I would call that as you've got item A in the case of the bowl.
Yes.
And then once item B goes into item A itself becomes because B was Muktza, that transforms itself into A, and A becomes Muktza.
Correct, and that's what Rashi says is the critical.
Well, the other people say that, you come with A, it's not inherently Muktza, but B, which is Muktza, sitting in it.
Exactly right, yes. So Rashi's view is that the Keli becomes Muktza because it has a Muktza item sitting inside it, that's bosses, and that's why you have Mevatel Kli MeHechano. The alternative view is even if the receptacle doesn't become a bosses, nonetheless it has Muktza sitting inside it, and therefore even though it itself is not inherently Muktza, you can't move it because it has Muktza sitting inside it, and that's enough to make it Mevatel Kli MeHechano. That would be what we could have thought were it not for Rashi. Now, I'm belaboring this point a little bit, simply because there's a machlokus that we're going to not go into in too much depth because it will overwhelm us. But Rashi assumes that the receptacle, the Keli, becomes Muktza because there's Muktza sitting inside it because it becomes bosses. It could be that there would be scenarios where it doesn't become a bosses. For example, if something is only put inside it for a short-term use or the like. Nonetheless, that's not the view of Rashi. Rashi says Mevatel Kli MeHechano is only where the receptacle becomes a bosses, and we're going to revisit this as we learn our way through the Gemara. Okay, so let's learn the first question the Gemara asks in this. Eisu Abaya. So Abaya asks on Rav Yosef. Eisu Abaya. Chovis shel tevel shenishbra. A barrel of tevel, of untied produce that broke. Maybe kli acher or miniach tachteh. You bring another kli and you place it underneath it. How can you do that? Surely that is Mevatel Kli MeHechano because it is receiving because it's receiving Muktza. Answers the Gemara, no. Tevel muchen who ate on Shabbos. Tevel is considered muchen with respect to Shabbos. Shem over v'tikin mesuchen, because if you fix it up, it becomes metuken, and therefore it's okay. Now, this answer to the Gemara is profoundly unclear. The tevel is Muktza at the moment. You could be over an Issa and tie the tevel, and then the tevel would now be regular food, and the tevel would cease to be Muktza. So there's two really questions on this answer of the Gemara. Question number one is, so what? At the moment, the tevel is Muktza. It's true you could fix up the tevel, and it would cease to be Muktza, but nonetheless, for now, the tevel is Muktza, in which case the utensil still seemingly should become a bosses, and I'll still be Mevatel Kli MeHechano. So this is question number one in the Gemara. Question number two on the Gemara is, well, surely then that unravels the whole sugya, because you could also roll the egg out of the utensil and transgress an issue, it's true, but stop the egg being inside the utensil and then it would become mutter. You could shake the water out of the bowl, you could shake the sparks out of the ash out of the receptacle, then it soaks us. You can fix up everything, in which case, what's the difference? You've unraveled the whole halacha of Mevatel Kli MeHechano. So this is the lack of clarity in the Gemara. Now, there would be two ways to answer the Gemara in theory, but we have to see if they make sense exactly. One thing you could say in the Gemara, the first question is the more profound question, which is conceptually, what does it mean that that the fact that you can tie the tevel and transgress what, but in the meantime it's still Muktza, so what difference does it make? The second question is a practical question, which is how is this different to the other answers of the Gemara? Now, the second question, as Adam was just now saying in the background, is really a question of Tosfos. Tosfos Divrei Maskil Tevel Muchan Hu Eitzel Shabbos asks this question in the name of the Rashba. I should point out, by the way, while I'm just finding my place in Tosfos, that the Rashba that Tosfos cites is not the Rashba that we learn in the Chedushei Rashba. The Rashba that we always quote and we call the Rashba is Rab Shlomo ben Aderes, who was a Spanish Rishon, who was a Talmud of the Ramban. The Ramban himself was an indirect student of the Baalei Tosfos some 200 years after the sort of prominence of the first Baalei Tosfos. When Tosfos quotes the Rashba, he means Reb Shimshon ben Avram, who we know as the Rosh Mishantz, one of the Baalei Tosfos, second generation Baalei Tosfos, a Talmud of the Ri Hazaken. Whenever Tosfos quotes the Ri, he means Rabbi Yitzchak Hazaken, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Shmuel Hazaken, who was one of the first generation Baalei Tosfos. Rabbeinu Yitzchak Hazaken, the Ri Hazaken, had a Talmud, Rabbeinu Shimshon, who was from the second generation of Baalei Tosfos, who is referred to as the Rosh Mishantz. The Rabbeinu Shimshon from Shantz. The real name of where Rabbeinu Shimshon came from was I think it's pronounced Sons, S-E-N-S, but in Yeshivish it's pronounced Shantz. That's how the Tosfos writes it, Shin Nun Sati. And that's who the Rashba is over here. It's not the Rashba, the Chedushei Rashba. It's whenever you see the Rashba quoted, it's important to know which Rashba is being referred to. Either way, the Rashba asked this question. For Oid's Hitcha, the Rashba asked, Ki heicha, I found in the meantime the Rashba as I was talking, Oid's Hitcha, Ki heicha da Oma. This is the middle of Tosfos of Masechet Tevel Muchan, who literally halfway down. The Oid's Hitcha. In the same way as the Gemara answers that if you fixed up the tevel, it's masukun. When you put a utensil under the hen to receive its egg, if you transgress and you remove the egg, then again the utensil will become mutter to move. The whole lomzus, the whole Torah of Bittul Kli MeHechano has been cancelled because you can always remove the muktzah item. V'lav pirchahi, and Tosfos of the Rashba answers, this is not a question. The utensil with the egg doesn't have a heta because the utensil with the egg is prohibited. You can remove the egg, but while the egg is inside, the utensil is prohibited. Masha inkim with the tevel. Even with the food remaining inside the pot, you can allow the food to become mutter, and therefore the logic of the Gemara makes sense. So basically, the answer to the Rashba is that tevel, you can remove the muktza from the tevel item by transgressing and tithing the tevel. With the egg, you can't make the egg non-muktza. The plate with the egg in remains muktza. You can remove the egg and remove the issa, but whilst the egg is inside, it remains muktza. Now, I've just tried to say Tosfos with a lot of passion and conviction, but what on earth does this answer mean? In both cases, you have a utensil that has a muktzah item in it, and in both cases, you can resolve the muktzah by transgressing, by being over something. In one case, you resolve the muktzah by being over and tithing the tevel. In the other case, you are over the issa by removing the egg. But in both cases, you've removed the muktzah from the utensil, and it becomes mutter. Says Tosfos, v'lav pirchi, it's no question at all. In one case, you're fixing the muktzah. In the other case, you are removing the muktzah. So we now have two different ways of asking our original question. Number one, we don't understand this logic. So what if you can fix the tevel? In the meantime, it's muktzah and therefore Mevatel Kli MeHechano. And number two, why should there be a difference between this case and the case of the egg? You can remove the egg, and Tosfos answers, because removing the egg, you're removing the egg. Whereas here, you're not removing the muktzah, you're fixing it. Why should this make any difference whatsoever? These are the questions that we have on the Gemara. Now,
with the tevel, you could say though, the interesting thing, the tevel has two potential solutions.
Yes.
Solution one is you could tuck in the tevel. Solution two is that you can also remove the tevel.
Yes.
So actually, because you've got two answers on the tevel, and we're saying, well, actually, if you remove the tevel, that is being Mevatel the whole law of bittul. That's why there is a difference between the two.
The question is, what's the svara behind that? It's true that with a tevel there's two solutions, and here there's only one. But again, MeHechano, why should that be a critical difference?
Can you say that 90% of the tevel is okay? So the actual tevel that is there, most of it that's muchan. It's like kind of.
So it's very interesting. Your comment is interesting on numerous levels. I wasn't going to speak too much about this, but But as is your way, Max, you often zoom in on important points. There's 2 points to say over here. The tevel, Max's question is as follows. He says, can we say that 90% of the tevel is okay and only 10% is problematic? And how would that 98% even 88% with the mice and everything? Yeah. And how does that affect the sugya? So there's 2 things that need to be thought about in what you just said. Number one, why is tevel untithed produce osa? So there's a machlokas Rashi and Tosfos. One way of looking at it is it's effectively a mixture. It has truma and maser mixed in, and it has heta mixed in. It's a mixture, but since it has truma mixed in, therefore it is osa. The second way of looking at it is no. Since it's not tithed, the whole product is osa. The whole food is forbidden because untithed food is forbidden. Now, Rashi adopts the stance. Rashi in several places seems to say the problem is that Issa is mixed in. Tosfos says he doesn't like that answer. The problem is that the whole thing is also because it's tevel. The reason Tosfos doesn't like this answer is because there's a paradox. Truma is a serious prohibition. A non-Kohen who eats truma is chayav bisa with Shemaim koris. It's a serious Issa, and therefore this would explain why tevel has a chayav koris also. However, maser is property of a Levi, but there's no prohibition on a Zar eating it, on a non-Levi eating it. Yet, nonetheless, a produce which has had truma taken it and hasn't had maser taken from it is still tevel. And this would seem to suggest, therefore, that the conceptual way of looking at tevel is not that it is a mixture, but that untithed is its own issa. This is number one. Number two, even a kohen can't eat tevel, and it transgresses the issa of tevel. Whereas if the model of the prohibition of tevel was that it was a mixture of truma and regular foods, surely a kohen should be allowed to eat it. If a kohen can eat truma, why shouldn't they be allowed to eat a mixture of truma and other things? And yet the halacha is not like that. A kohen also can't eat tevel. So these are questions on Rashi. Nonetheless, Rashi does view it, Max, as the way you are, as a mixture. So, okay, let's say we view it as a mixture. Where does that take us? Well, it doesn't obviously resolve the question of the Gemara, because the fact is the whole thing is inedible and therefore can't be eaten. It is true that if you have 2 things in a bowl, something more chashuv, which is not Muktza, and something which is less chashuv, which is Muktza, that may resolve the issue of bosses. But over here, even if conceptually you're right that it is a mixture of which 88% is mutter and only 12% is asa, nonetheless, it's a mixture, and therefore the whole thing can't be eaten, practically speaking, and therefore the logic would dictate that the whole thing is Muktza, and therefore your answer wouldn't work. Finally, the Gemara doesn't say what you say. The Gemara doesn't say that because it's tithable, therefore we should view it as a mixture. The Gemara says because it's tithable, therefore it's muchan. So I don't think the suggestion works, though it's a very, very interesting suggestion. And you could argue that you could read the Gemara as saying because it's tithable, therefore we should view it as not muktzah in the classic sense. I will come on to a more modest version of your suggestion, Max, though shortly. But for now, that's a summary of well, I wasn't going to go into, but it's an interesting topic, what the nature of the muktza of tevel is.
One detail on that. Would it make a difference if it was like 10 oranges separate or a liquid where it's all literally a mixture, completely mixed up?
So in Hilchas Bittel and Rove, yes, absolutely. And I have no intention now of going into the halachas of Bittel and Rove. Right. The 2 sorts of mixture called lach belach and yavish v'yavish, very, very important distinction. In terms of our sugya, I'm not sure it makes a difference. Let's just think this through. If you have 9 permitted oranges and 1 forbidden orange in a Keli, the Keli wouldn't become a bossis. You're correct, because you have the more chashuv entity and not muktzah, and it's a minority entity which is muktzah. If you have a mixture, the whole thing is forbidden, even though 90% of it is mutter, and therefore the whole thing is muktzah, because lemaisi you can't eat it because you have no way of separating out the mixture. So you're right in the distinction you're drawing, and but hagufa, even if we view tevel as a mixture, I don't think your answer works, because the fact is the whole mixture is forbidden, unless you could somehow have bittel or the like. Yeah, absolutely.
But the point is tevel remains tevel.
Well, the point is Tevel, either, well, if you learn like Tosfos, Tevel is Tevel, nothing to talk about. Even if we learn like Rashi, which we don't fully understand that it's some sort of mixture, it doesn't make a difference because the fact is it's Tevel. The fact is you can't eat it, yeah. And if it's in practical Halacha, it's all forbidden, yeah. And Bittul doesn't work with Tevel, correct, yes. Bittul can't work with Tevel by definition because it's Tevel, yes, yeah. Okay, so there's I think two reasonable suggestions in how to learn the Gemara. The first suggestion is that, sorry, I should make one more point before we come on to the answers. Now, you could learn the Gemara to be saying that it doesn't become a bossis at all. And the reason would be as follows, can something become a temporary bossis? Let's say I have a Muktza item that has a time switch. It's a ticking time bomb in reverse, meaning something is going to be Muktza for a time, but not Muktza forever. And there are such items, I'm not going to go into the details of this. Or let's say I plan on placing an object on top of an item for a time and then finding a way of removing it. Can you have a bossis l'shah? This is what this halachic question is known as. Can you have a bossis l'shah, temporary bossis? Now, if you adopt the stance that you cannot have a bossis l'shah, the whole point of a bossis is that it is a permanent placing of an object. You're dedicating the receptacle to permanently house a Muktza item. Were we to adopt that stance, maybe we would have an answer to the Gemara. And the Gemara is saying, since the tevel is fixable, therefore it never became a bossis because it's only a temporary receptacle. At some point you're going to tithe it and it's going to cease to be Muktza. And in theory, you could even do that tithing on Shabbos. Now, this is a position in the Rishonim. It's known in Halacha as the view of the Baal Hamar. We're not going to go through this now. It's way beyond our capacity in the Shiur, but just file it away as a piece of information that there is a view, a minority position in the amongst the Rishonim, the Baal Hamar, who holds that if you have something, a Muktza item for a short amount of time on another item, it doesn't become a bossis. There are a number of questions on this view of the Baal Hamar, including from the continuation of our sugya, but this is what the Baal Hamar says. The majority opinion, and I meant to say majority, I mean everyone else other than the Baal Hamar. The Baal Hamar is in the minority of one to the best of my knowledge. The majority opinion is not like that. Even if you have something which is a bossis for a time, for that time that the Muktza item is sitting on it, it's a bossis. It's almost an explicit Gemara later on in the Omid, in which the Gemara says that if something is a bossis for the whole of Bein Hashmashas, then it remains Muktza for if something is Muktza for the whole of Bein Hashmashas, then it remains Muktza ever. If something is Muktza Shah, it's Muktza Shah. So there's the Baal Hamar is a difficult view, but the majority opinion is not like that. Something can be a bossis Shah. So just for the sake of completion, we could give one answer to the Gemara, which is say, the Gemara is saying, since it's temporary Muktza, it's only a temporary bossis, and therefore temporary bossis is permissible. This is not how we paskin, it's not the view of 99% of the Rishonim. Most of the Rishonim will say that while something is Muktza, if it's sitting on top of something else, that item is a bossis, period, end of discussion. In which case, what on earth is the answer to the Gemara over here, that the tevel is fixable? Now, one answer to that question would be that it is true that the item becomes, that the tevel is Muktza. And it is equally true that therefore the receptacle of the tevel becomes a bossis. Nonetheless, the Gemara is answering that it doesn't become Mevatel Kli MeHechano. And the logic would be, let's remember that Mevatel Kli MeHechano, let's go into Rashi, is a gzeira that it looks like boiner, or it looks like soisa. Looks like attaching something to the ground, or it looks like destroying the Keli. Now, if I know that it's fixable without removing the object, but it's fixable even in its current situation, then maybe that doesn't look like bone, it doesn't look like sosa. That I haven't fixed it to the ground because I can fix it. I haven't destroyed it because I can fix it. So this isn't Mevatel Kli MeHechano, and that's the answer to the Gemara. It's not Mevatel Kli MeHechano when it's fixable. And this would explain the answer of Tosfos, why he says that this isn't comparable. And Tosfos seems to think this is obvious. He says it's a lav pich, it's not a question. It's obviously not comparable to the argument that I can remove the egg. If an egg falls in a plate, that's Mevatel Kli MeHechano. It's true I could remove the egg, but that's like removing the cement. That's like rebuilding the utensil. It's changing the physical structure of what I have in front of me. The whole gezerah is, when you make a utensil either fixed to the ground or unusable, that looks like breaking the utensil or fixing it to the ground. So Tosfos is very clever. You can remove the egg and release it. You can remove the cement and undo your building, or you can rebuild a Keli and fix it. That doesn't make it not look like a melacha. So that is the essence of the melacha. If you have to move something around and remove the very object that created the problem, that's MeVazel means don't put the object in. It looks like you're doing a melacha. So removing the melacha, the object just looks like you're doing yet another melacha. You're building a Keli or dismantling a building. You haven't achieved anything. The whole wonders of the Gemara is that if you can fix the situation without changing anything in the structure, that's already a good answer. That's already not Mevatel MeHechano, because it doesn't look like building or destruction, because you don't need to remove the setup, and yet you can make it usable. So that's one way of learning the answer of the Gemara. A second way of learning the answer of the Gemara is that the Gemara is saying this is a weak issa, it's a weak Muktza. In other words, since this Muktza can be undone, therefore it's a weak Muktza, and a weak Muktza doesn't create the prohibition on Mevatel MeHechano, because people are aware that you can't unravel the issa and it will cease to be Muktza, and therefore we're not worried that this will look like Boner or Sosa, or even according to the other reasons, we're not worried that this is, creating using something for a prohibited functionality, because it's a weak Muktza. What the Gemara means to say is it's Kodesh. The Muktza is weak. This is based on the language of the Rishonim, really. The Rashba in our Sukkah uses this language. He says it's a weak Muktza when you have a if you're here from Mariv, by the way, the Mariv is upstairs, not down here. You have a weak Muktza, and therefore the Issa doesn't. If you're looking for Mariv, it's upstairs, not down here. Sorry? You looking for Mariv or? Yes. No, it's upstairs, not down here. Yeah. It's upstairs, not down here. Sorry, yeah. No, not at all. We're finishing anyway, but just I didn't want you to miss Mariv. Okay, so this is the second way of reading the Gemara, that all the Gemara is saying it's a weak Muktza because it's unravable, it can be undone, and therefore they didn't make the Gzeira in this case. That's the second reading of the Gemara. We've run out of time for today, and therefore I'll stop there. Just for the sake of when I upload the recording, can you just indicate, were you able to hear me after that one episode, or were there further disruptions? Yeah, it was smooth after that. Perfect. Okay, excellent. Yeah, Asha.
Very much.
That's interesting.
I think that's exactly what the Rabbi is saying. In fact, the Rabbi is saying it's a weak form of Muktza. I could see this saying it's not Muktza at all. You just go and start eating.
I don't know what to do with that. Asha is asking, the language of Rashi is She'ein boy Muktza Ela Isuroi. What's the aim boy? There's not in it Muktza. Does it mean there's not in the Keli because it doesn't become a bossis? Or the Tevel doesn't have Muktza? Yeah. So Rashi's saying it's a less severe type of Muktza. So he's saying the second explanation, not the first explanation. Very nice, thank you. I missed that. Very, very good point. Very nice. So those who are online, Asher is saying Rashi's language is the aim by Muktza, that the Tevel is not deemed Muktza. Now that's inaccurate. It is Muktza. So what does Rashi mean it's not Muktza? He says because it's fixable, it's not called Muktza. As he's saying, it's a weaker form of Muktza. The stress is on the status of how Muktza is the Tevel, as opposed to the stress being on to what degree is the Keli destroyed or tied to the ground, attached to the ground. Very nice.
Well, I think let's ask the first question. Is Tevel Muktza? The barrel of Tevel Muktza. I think he's saying it's not Muktza.
This is difficult because in something which can only be used for Issa is a classic example of Muktza Machmas Issa. That's a classic Muktza.
Yeah, but Ochel isn't Muktza. I mean, Ochel generally is not Muktza, is it?
True, but inedible Ochel is.
In Max's case of oranges are edible.
Not that
it's edible if you transgress an Issa.
Or if you're starving.
What, Pekach Nefesh? Well, then everything. I mean, anything is not. The whole point is it muchan in normal circumstances. That's the definition of muktzah. Okay, I will stop here. I mean, I hadn't noticed your diuk. It's my shame. It's a great diuk. It should have been noted, and I need to think this through. So, okay, so we'll leave that with a piece of homework, which is: do we have a diuk as to which answer Rashi is giving, and have we read Rashi correctly at all? Maybe Rashi means literally it's not muktzah. Okay, so we'll pause there, and Mevatel will resume on Sunday. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.